The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in the middle of nowhere, and Adaline Turner pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, her breath catching as she realized the world outside had turned completely white. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she had never met, and now, mere hours from her destination, nature itself seemed determined to prevent her arrival. Storms getting worse. The driver shouted from above, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Can't see the road no more. We got to find shelter or we're all going to freeze to death." Adaline clutched her worn carpetbag tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was December 1883, and she had left everything behind: her job as a seamstress in a crowded factory, her tiny boarding house room, her few acquaintances who had called her foolish for answering a mail-order bride advertisement. But what choice did she have? At 23 years old, she had watched too many women grow old and desperate in that city, their fingers bleeding from needlework, their eyes dimming from lack of hope. When Randall Irving's letters had arrived, neat and proper, describing his ranch outside Platteville, Colorado, she had convinced herself that marriage to a stranger was better than slow starvation in the East. Now she wondered if she would even survive to meet him. The stagecoach door flew open, and a blast of icy wind and snow swept inside. The only other passenger, an elderly woman traveling to visit her son, whimpered and pulled her shawl tighter. The driver's weathered face appeared in the doorway, his mustache already crusted with ice. "There's a cabin about a quarter-mile that way," he said, pointing into the white void. "I can barely make it out, but it's our only chance. We got to go now, before this blizzard gets any worse." Adaline forced herself to move, gathering her belongings and stepping out into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and burning her lungs. Snow pelted her face, and within seconds she could barely see the stagecoach behind her. She grabbed onto the elderly woman's arm, and together they stumbled through drifts that were already knee-deep. The journey to the cabin felt like walking through a nightmare. Every step was a battle against the wind, which seemed determined to push her back or knock her sideways. Her fashionable Boston boots, meant for cobblestone streets, were completely inadequate for this wilderness. Her feet went numb, then her hands, then her face. She kept moving only because stopping meant death. When the dark shape of a building finally emerged from the white curtain of snow, Adaline wanted to weep with relief. The driver pounded on the door, shouting to be heard over the storm. For a terrifying moment, no one answered, and Adaline imagined them all freezing on this threshold, so close to shelter yet denied it. Then the door swung open. The man who stood there was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair slightly too long and eyes the color of a summer sky that seemed startling against the backdrop of winter fury behind them. He wore simple ranch clothes, worn denim, a flannel shirt, work boots, and he held a rifle in one hand, though he lowered it immediately when he saw them. "Get inside," he said, his voice deep and commanding. He did not ask questions or hesitate. "All of you, now." Adaline stumbled across the threshold, and the warmth of the cabin hit her like a wave. Her legs gave out, and she would have collapsed if the stranger had not caught her elbow, steadying her with a firm grip. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, guiding her toward a stone fireplace where flames danced and crackled. "You too, madam," he added to the elderly woman, who was shaking so violently her teeth chattered. As the driver helped get them settled, Adaline finally had a chance to look around. The cabin was small but well built, with chinked log walls and solid furniture. It was clearly a working ranch hand's quarters, practical, sparse, but clean. A single room served as kitchen, bedroom, and living area with a loft visible above. Supplies were stacked neatly against one wall. The stranger moved with practiced efficiency, bringing blankets and hot coffee that must have been warming on the stove. He did not speak much, but his actions were gentle, especially when he wrapped a quilt around the elderly woman's shoulders and pressed a steaming mug into her trembling hands. "Thank you," Adaline managed to say, her voice hoarse. "We would have died out there." He glanced at her then, really looked at her for the first time, and something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or recognition, though how could he recognize her? "You are safe now," he said simply. The driver cleared his throat. "I am obliged to you, mister. That storm came out of nowhere. Never seen one blow up so fast. I have been driving this route for 10 years, and I thought I knew better, but this one caught me by surprise." "It happens," the stranger said. "December in Colorado can be unpredictable. You folks traveling far, Platteville," Adaline said, finding her voice growing stronger as warmth returned to her body. "I am supposed to arrive today. I am expected." The stranger's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned away to add wood to the fire, his movements suddenly less fluid, more controlled. "Platteville is another 8 miles north. You will not make it today. Probably not tomorrow either, from the looks of this storm." Adaline's heart sank. Randall Irving's letters had been specific about her arrival date. He had arranged everything so carefully, planning to meet her at the stage stop and bring her to his ranch. What would he think when she did not arrive? Would he assume she had changed her mind? Would he believe she had taken his advance money for travel and decided to keep it, disappearing like some con artist? "I must send word," she said, standing up too quickly. Dizziness washed over her, and the stranger was there again, his hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Sit," he said, and it was not harsh, just firm. "There is nowhere to send word to, not in this weather. No one is going anywhere until this blizzard passes. But he will be worried. He will think you are caught in the storm, which is exactly what happened. Any man with sense will understand that." The elderly woman spoke up for the first time, her voice quavering. "Are you a mail-order bride, dear?" Adaline felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold that still clung to her bones. "Yes, madam. I am traveling from Boston to marry Mr. Randall Irving. We have been corresponding for 6 months." The stranger's back was to them as he checked the coffee pot, but Adaline saw his shoulders tense. When he turned around, his expression was carefully neutral. "Randall Irving," he repeated. "You know him?" Hope flared in Adaline's chest. "I know of him. He owns one of the bigger ranches in the area, runs cattle, has about 15 hands working for him." The stranger's tone was flat, giving nothing away. "He sounds successful," the elderly woman said, smiling at Adaline. "You are a lucky girl." Adaline was not sure how to respond to that. How could she know if she was lucky or not? She had never laid eyes on the man she was supposed to marry. His letters had been polite and informative, describing his property and his need for a wife to help manage his household. He had been honest about wanting children, about expecting her to cook and clean and support his enterprise. She had not expected romance or passion. She had hoped for security, respect, and perhaps, eventually, companionship. Now, sitting in this stranger's cabin while a blizzard raged outside, all of that seemed very far away. "What is your name?" she asked the stranger. Realizing they had not even exchanged that basic courtesy, he hesitated for just a moment. "Rowan Irving." The coffee mug nearly slipped from Adaline's fingers. "Irving," she whispered. "Randall is my brother," Rowan said, and there was something in his voice she could not quite identify. Bitterness, resignation. "This is his land, I work for him." The cabin suddenly felt smaller. Adaline stared at this man who shared a name with her intended husband, trying to process this information. They looked nothing alike. from what she could tell from the photograph Randall had sent.
This story was posted
In
on
the
the channel
picture,
The Rusty
Randall had
Saddle.
been
Please
seated
do not
formally,
repost it
dressed
in
in a
any
fine
form.
suit, his hair slicked back, his expression serious and prosperous. He had looked like a successful businessman, which was exactly what he was. Rowan looked like the land itself, rough, weathered, real. "Does your brother know we are here?" she asked. "The main house is 3 miles away. No one knows anything in this weather. We are cut off until the storm breaks." The driver, who had been warming himself silently by the fire, spoke up. "Could be days from the feel of it. I have seen these high country blizzards last a week." Adaline felt panic rising in her throat. "A week? But we cannot all stay here for a week. It is not proper. It is not, it is survival," Rowan interrupted, and his blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Nothing else matters right now except staying alive. Propriety will not keep you warm. Reputation will not fill your stomach. You are here, and you will stay here until it is safe to travel. That is the end of it." His authoritative tone should have annoyed her, but instead, Adaline found it oddly comforting. Here was someone who knew what to do, who would make the decisions that kept them alive. After months of uncertainty, of making every choice herself, of carrying all the weight of her future on her own shoulders, there was something almost restful about having someone else take command. "I apologize," she said quietly. "You are right, of course. Thank you for your hospitality." Something softened in Rowan's expression. "No need to apologize. I know this is not what you planned." He glanced out the window, where the world had disappeared entirely behind a wall of white. "Not what any of us planned. That first night was awkward and strange." The driver, who introduced himself as Walter Mackenzie, stretched out on the floor near the fire with several blankets. The elderly woman, whose name was Mrs. Patterson, took the bed despite everyone's protests that Adaline, as the younger woman, should have it. Adaline ended up in the loft, which was really just a platform reached by a ladder, with blankets and a thin mattress that Rowan had stored there. Rowan himself sat in a chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch as if the storm might breach the walls at any moment. Adaline could not sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to the wind howl and the cabin creak, acutely aware of the man sitting below her. She kept thinking about the moment their eyes had met, about the way her heart had stuttered in her chest. It meant nothing, she told herself firmly. She was exhausted, frightened, overwhelmed. Anyone who had saved her life would have provoked a similar reaction. But when she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, it was not Randall's face from the photograph that filled her dreams. It was Rowan's. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Pale gray light filtered through the windows, barely brighter than twilight, and the wind still roared. Adaline climbed down from the loft, trying to smooth her hopelessly wrinkled dress and tame her auburn hair, which had escaped its pins during the night. Rowan stood at the stove, cooking breakfast. He glanced up when she descended, and Adaline thought she saw appreciation flash in his eyes before he looked away. "Morning. Coffee is ready. Thank you." She accepted the mug he poured for her, wrapping both hands around its warmth. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some." He was a man of few words, she was learning. Adaline sat at the rough wooden table and watched him work. He moved with the confidence of someone who had been taking care of himself for a long time. When he set a plate of bacon and fried eggs in front of her, she realized she was famished. Mrs. Patterson woke next, then Walter. They ate together in a silence that was not quite comfortable but not hostile, either the awkward quiet of strangers forced into proximity. After breakfast, Walter ventured to check on the horses, which were sheltered in a small lean-to attached to the cabin. He came back white-faced and shaking his head. "Cannot see 10 feet in front of my face. Drifts are over my waist in places. We are not going anywhere today. Adaline felt the walls closing in. One night she could justify. 2 nights, 3 how many before it became a scandal. She was supposed to arrive as Randall Irving's bride, pure and proper, ready to be married immediately. Instead, she was trapped in close quarters with his brother, a man who made her pulse race in a way that Randall's carefully penned letters never had. "You are worried about your reputation," Rowan said later, when the others were napping and she stood by the window, staring out at the endless white. She had not heard him approach. "Should I not be? I suppose most women in your position would be. And what position is that?" She turned to face him, surprised by the edge in her own voice. Alone in the wilderness, dependent on the charity of strangers. "I am not dependent on charity. I can pay for my keep." She reached for the small purse she kept tied to her belt, the one that held the last of her carefully saved money. Rowan's hand caught her wrist, stopping her. His grip was gentle but firm, his palm warm against her skin. "I was not asking for payment." They stood like that for a moment, barely a foot apart, his hand still circling her wrist. Adaline could feel her pulse beating against his fingers and wondered if he could feel it too. Something electric seemed to pass between them, an awareness that made her mouth go dry. Rowan released her abruptly and stepped back. "The storm will pass. You will get to Platteville. You will marry my brother and all will be as you planned." "Will it?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Why would it not? Adaline did not have an answer for that. Or rather, she had an answer she could not speak aloud. "Because I feel something when I look at you that I have never felt before. Because you saved my life, and now I cannot imagine not knowing you. Because the thought of marrying your brother and seeing you only as a distant relation fills me with a grief I do not understand." She said none of that. Instead, she turned back to the window and whispered, "I suppose you are right." But they both knew she was lying. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Mrs. Patterson told long, rambling stories about her children and grandchildren. Walter dozed by the fire, occasionally waking to check the weather and shake his head grimly. Rowan busied himself with small tasks, sharpening his knife, checking the supplies, reinforcing the door against the drifts that piled higher and higher. Adaline tried to make herself useful. She mended a tear in one of Rowan's shirts, using the sewing kit she always carried. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar motions, but her eyes kept drifting to where he sat, his dark head bent over the leather harness he was repairing. "You are good at that," he said without looking up. "I worked in a garment factory for 3 years. I can sew almost anything." "Why did you leave?" The question was casual, but Adaline sensed genuine curiosity behind it. "The wages barely covered my rent and food. I was getting older, and the owners preferred hiring younger girls they could pay even less. I could see my future, and it was bleak. When I saw Mr. Irving's advertisement, it seemed like an opportunity. An opportunity to marry a man you have never met. An opportunity to have a home, a family, a future that involved something more than slowly going blind in a factory making dresses I could never afford to wear." Rowan did look up then, his blue eyes searching her face. "That is very practical. Women in my position cannot afford to be romantic. And if there is no affection between you and Randall, perhaps it will grow in time. Your brother's letters suggest he is a good man." "He is," Rowan said, and there was something complicated in his voice. "Successful, ambitious, respected, everything a husband should be." "But," Adaline prompted, sensing there was more. Rowan set down the harness. "But nothing. You will see for yourself soon enough." He stood and walked to the window, effectively ending the conversation. Adaline returned to her mending, but her hands trembled slightly as she made each stitch. What was she doing? She should not be having these conversations with this man. She should
This
not be
story was
noticing the
posted
way
on the
his
channel The
shoulders filled
Rusty
out his
Saddle.
shirt,
Please do
or the
not
way his
repost it
rare
in any
smile
form.
transformed his serious face. She was engaged to his brother, and in a few days, she would marry that brother and begin her new life. This interlude in the storm was just that, an interlude, a strange pause in reality that would soon end. But when night fell again and she lay in the loft staring into darkness, Adaline knew she was lying to herself. What she felt for Rowan Irving was already far more than what she felt for his brother, and every hour spent in his presence only made it worse. On the third day, the wind finally began to die down. The snow still fell, but gentler now, drifting down in fat flakes instead of horizontal sheets. Walter announced that if the weather continued to improve, they might be able to travel the next day. Adaline should have been relieved. Instead, she felt something like dread. Rowan had grown quieter as the storm waned, retreating into himself. He spoke only when necessary, avoided meeting her eyes, and found excuses to be busy with tasks that took him as far from her as the small cabin allowed. Adaline understood what he was doing, creating distance, reminding them both of the boundaries that existed between them. It hurt more than it should have. That evening, after Mrs. Patterson and Walter had both retired early, exhausted from the strain of confinement, Adaline found herself alone with Rowan once more. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his expression distant. "May I ask you something?" she said quietly, sitting in the chair across from him. He tensed but nodded. "Why do you work for your brother? You seem capable of running your own place." Rowan was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "The ranch was our father's. When he died 5 years ago, he left it all to Randall. He was the eldest, and father believed in primogeniture. I was given the choice to stay and work for wages or leave and make my own way. You chose to stay. The land has been in our family for 30 years. My mother is buried on that land. I could not just walk away from it." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable now. Adaline's heart ached for him. "That does not seem fair," Rowan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fairness has nothing to do with it. That is how things are done. Randall runs the business and I work the cattle. He lives in the big house our father built and I live in this lined shack. He advertises for a cultured bride from back east and He stopped abruptly, his jaw clenching. "And you," Adaline whispered. Rowan turned to look at her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "And I stand here watching the woman I want belong to my brother." The words hung in the air between them, stark and honest and devastating. "Rowan," Adaline breathed, his name a prayer and a plea. He stood abruptly. "I should not have said that. Forgive me. You are promised to Randall and I have no right. What if I do not want to be promised to Randall?" The words burst from her before she could stop them. "What if every moment I spend with you makes me more certain that I am making a terrible mistake?" "It does not matter what we want," Rowan said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "You signed a contract. You took his money for travel. In the eyes of the law and society, you are as good as married already. I could return the money. I could what? Go back to Boston. You said yourself that life was killing you, and even if you stayed here, what could I offer you? I work for wages, Adaline. I have nothing of my own except this cabin and the clothes on my back. Randall can give you security, comfort, a real home. I would be asking you to give up everything for a man who can barely support himself, much less a wife. I do not care about those things. You say that now, in the heat of the moment, but you would care later. When winter came and we could barely afford fuel, when children came and there was not enough food, when you grew old before your time from hard work and privation." He shook his head. "I will not do that to you." I will not let you throw away your future for something that can never work. Tears burned in Adaline's eyes. So we just pretend this never happened. I marry your brother and see you at family gatherings and act as if my heart does not break every time I look at you. Rowan crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled down her cheeks. I do not know, he said hoarsely. I do not have answers, Adaline. All I know is that from the moment you walked through that door, half frozen and completely stubborn, you have been all I can think about. And it is tearing me apart because you are the one thing in this world I cannot have. She rose on her toes, closing the last few inches between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was everything her practical mind had insisted did not matter, desperate and fierce and achingly sweet. Rowan made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand sliding into her hair, the other wrapping around her waist. Adaline had never been kissed before, had never been held like this, as if she was precious and necessary and wholly desired. It felt like coming home and leaping off a cliff at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "This is madness," he whispered. "Then let us be mad together." Adaline, a log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks, and they both jerked back to reality. Rowan stepped away, running a hand through his hair, his expression tortured. "We cannot do this. It is not right. Randall is my brother, and you are his intended bride, and we cannot. What if I spoke to him? Explained. Explained what? That you fell in love with his brother before you even met him. That would devastate him, Adaline, and it would destroy what little relationship Randall and I still have. He already resents me for staying on the ranch, for being a reminder of father's unfairness. If I took you from him too, you are not taking me. I am choosing. It amounts to the same thing." Rowan moved to the door, putting as much physical distance between them as possible. "Tomorrow, the weather should be clear enough to travel. Walter will take you to Platteville, you will marry Randall as planned, and we will forget this conversation ever happened." "I will never forget," Adaline said quietly. Rowan's shoulders sagged. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Neither will I." They did not speak again that night. Adaline climbed to the loft and cried silently into her pillow, mourning a love that had barely begun before it ended. Below, she could hear Rowan moving restlessly, unable to settle, and she knew he was suffering just as much as she was. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The sky was a hard, bright blue, and the sun glinted off snow so white it hurt to look at. The storm had passed, and with it, their brief, impossible time together. Walter hitched the horses to the stagecoach, which was half buried in drifts and required considerable digging to free. Mrs. Patterson packed her belongings with cheerful efficiency, clearly ready to continue her journey. Adaline moved through the motions mechanically, gathering her carpetbag, pinning her hat in place, pulling on her inadequate coat. Rowan saddled his own horse, announcing he would ride with them to the main house to help inform Randall of their arrival. His tone was brisk and businesslike, as if the past 3 days had meant nothing, as if he had not held her and kissed her, and told her she was everything he could not have. The ride through the snow-covered landscape was beautiful and terrible. Adaline sat in the stagecoach, staring out at the endless white, her mind numb. Beside her, Mrs. Patterson chattered happily about finally seeing her son. Adaline made appropriate noises but could not have repeated a word of what the woman said. Through the window, she could see Rowan riding alongside, his back straight, his face expressionless. Just once, he glanced toward the coach and their eyes met. The longing in his gaze was so intense it physically hurt, but then he looked away and the moment was gone. The main house appeared on the horizon after about an hour of travel. It was
This story
impressively
was posted on the
two-story
channel The
structure with a
Rusty
wide
Saddle.
porch,
Please do not
built from
repost it in
solid
any
timber
form.
with glass windows that gleamed in the sunlight. Outbuildings dotted the property: a large barn, a bunkhouse, various sheds and corrals. It looked prosperous and permanent, exactly the kind of home Adaline had dreamed of having. It felt like a prison. As the stagecoach pulled up in front of the house, the door opened and a man emerged. Randall Irving was exactly as his photograph had portrayed him: tall, well-dressed even in ranch attire, his hair neatly combed, his face bearing the same basic features as Rowan's but somehow softer, less weathered. He was handsome in a conventional way, and his smile as he approached the coach was warm and welcoming. "Miss Turner," he said, opening the coach door and offering his hand. "I was desperately worried. When the storm hit and you did not arrive, I feared the worst. Thank God you are safe." Adaline let him help her down, and when his hand clasped hers, she felt exactly nothing. No spark, no flutter of her heart, no sense of connection, just polite, distant courtesy. "Mr. Irving," she said, forcing a smile, "thank you for your concern. The storm caught us by surprise, but we found shelter with your brother." Only then did Randall seem to notice Rowan, who had dismounted and was standing a few feet away, holding his horse's reins. "Rowan," Randall said, and there was something cool in his voice. "You have been keeping our guests at the line shack. Where else would I have kept them? The storm was too fierce to bring them here. Of course, I am in your debt." The words were correct, but the tone suggested Randall did not particularly like being indebted to his younger brother. "Miss Turner, you must be exhausted. Please, come inside. We will get you warmed up and fed properly, and then we can discuss our wedding arrangements." Adaline cast one desperate glance back at Rowan, silently begging him to say something, to do something, to not let this happen. But he just stood there, his face carved from stone, and gave her the slightest shake of his head. She let Randall guide her into the house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior, well furnished with pieces that must have been freighted in at considerable expense. A fire roared in a large stone fireplace. The floors were polished wood, covered with fine rugs. It was warm and comfortable, and everything she should have wanted. Randall led her to a seat near the fire and called for his housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, who brought hot tea and fresh biscuits. He fussed over Adaline, asking about her journey, apologizing profusely for the storm as if he had any control over the weather, explaining his plans for their wedding, which he hoped to hold within the next few days. Adaline heard herself responding appropriately, but it was as if she was watching someone else's life unfold. This was not her. This was some dull version of Adaline who could sit and smile and nod while her heart was dying. At some point, Rowan entered the house. He stood in the background, refusing Mrs. Chen's offer of tea, clearly uncomfortable. Randall barely acknowledged him except to ask if the cattle had weathered the storm well. Rowan's one-word answers grew more clipped with each question. Finally, Rowan said, "I should get back to the line shack. Check on the livestock out there." "Yes, yes, of course," Randall said dismissively. "Miss Turner, my brother works the northern section of the ranch. You will not have much occasion to see him, I am afraid. He prefers solitude." It was said casually, perhaps even kindly, but Adaline heard the subtext. Rowan was not part of this world, not part of the life she was entering. He would be exiled to the edges of the property, kept at a distance, out of sight and out of mind. Rowan's eyes met hers one last time. She saw everything she felt mirrored their anguish, resignation, love that had nowhere to go. Then he turned and walked out the door, and it felt like he was taking her heart with him. Adaline barely made it through the rest of the day. Randall showed her the house, proudly pointing out the modern conveniences he had installed. He introduced her to the ranch hands who came by, all of whom tipped their hats respectfully. He talked about his plans for expansion, his breeding program for his cattle, his business relationships with buyers in Denver and Kansas City. He was a good man, Adaline realized, intelligent, ambitious, fair to his workers. He treated her with respect and consideration. If she had met him first, if Rowan did not exist, she might have been content with this match. But Rowan did exist, and after knowing what it felt like to be in his presence, to hear his voice, to feel his kiss, the thought of binding herself to Randall for life was unbearable. That night, lying in the guest room Randall had prepared for her, Adaline stared at the ceiling and tried to think clearly. Her options were limited. She could go through with the marriage, consigning herself and Rowan to a lifetime of silent longing. She could break the engagement and return to Boston, where poverty and slow death awaited. Or she could find some third path, something her practical, careful mind had not yet imagined. Before dawn, she made her decision. She waited until the household was awake and breakfast was served. Mrs. Chen set out eggs, bacon, fresh bread, and coffee. Randall sat at the head of the table reading a newspaper that was weeks old, having been delivered before the storm. He looked up when Adaline entered and smiled. "Good morning. I hope you slept well. Mr. Irving, we need to talk." Something in her tone made him set down the newspaper. "That sounds serious." Adaline sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I cannot marry you." The silence that followed was deafening. Randall stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to something harder. "I beg your pardon. I am sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. You have been nothing but kind and honorable, and you deserve better than this. But I cannot marry you when my heart belongs to someone else." "Someone else," Randall repeated slowly. "You have been in Colorado for 3 days. How could you possibly—" He stopped, understanding dawning on his face. "Rowan." It was not a question. Adaline lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. "Yes." Randall stood, his chair scraping back harshly. He walked to the window, his back rigid. When he spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "My brother, of course. He always has been good at taking what should be mine. He did not take anything. He tried to send me away to honor your claim, but I cannot help what I feel." "Did you consider that this is exactly what he wanted? That he saw an opportunity to humiliate me, to take the one thing I had that he did not, and he seized it?" "That is not what happened," Adaline said firmly. "Rowan wanted nothing more than for me to marry you as planned. Whatever exists between us happened despite our best efforts to prevent it." Randall turned to face her, and she saw pain beneath his anger. "And what do you think will happen now? You will run off with him to that shack, live in poverty while I continue to prosper. Do you think that will not eat away at him, at both of you, over the years? I do not know what will happen. All I know is that I cannot marry one brother while loving another. It would be a lie, and all 3 of us would suffer for it." "I already am suffering," Randall said quietly. He moved back to the table but did not sit. "I have spent 6 months corresponding with you, imagining our life together. I told my friends and business associates that I was bringing a bride from Boston. I have made plans, Adaline. I chose you specifically because you seemed intelligent and practical, not some flighty romantic who would be swayed by a handsome face." Adaline flinched but held her ground. "I am still practical. That is why I am telling you this now, before we marry, before children and years bind us together in misery. Yes, it will be embarrassing and difficult, but it will be far better than a lifetime of regret." Randall was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Does Rowan know you are doing this? No, I imagine he will be furious.
This
He was
story was
determined
posted
to
on the channel
sacrifice
The
his
Rusty
own
Saddle.
happiness for your
Please do not
sake.
repost it in
How
any
noble
form.
of him, Randall said bitterly. He sat down heavily, suddenly looking older. You realize I could hold you to our contract. I paid your travel expenses. I could demand recompense. I will pay you back every penny, even if it takes years. I will not cheat you. I do not want your money, Randall snapped. Then he sighed, rubbing his face wearily. What a mess. What an absolute mess. Adaline reached across the table, though she stopped short of touching his hand. I am truly sorry. If I could control my heart, I would. But I learned a long time ago that some things are beyond our control. Randall looked at her, really looked at her, and some of the hardness in his expression softened. You really do love him. Yes. He is a fool, you know. So determined to prove he does not need anything, to show father's memory that he can make it on his own, that he will never ask for help or accept what he sees as charity. He would rather freeze in that shack than admit he wants something better. I know. I have seen that in him. Randall drummed his fingers on the table, clearly thinking. Finally, he said, I will not stand in your way. I will not hold you to our contract or demand payment, but I want something in return. Adaline's heart leapt with cautious hope. What? I want you to make him see reason. There is a section of this ranch 500 acres on the western edge, near the river. Good land, good water. I want to deed it to Rowan. It should have been his from the start, and father was wrong to deny him. But Rowan is too proud to accept it if he thinks it is charity from me. If you are going to be with him, if you are going to build a life together, then make him accept that land. Make him build something real instead of clinging to that damned shack out of spite. You would give him land. After everything, he is still my brother, Randall said gruffly. I never wanted to keep him poor, Adaline. I did not choose how father divided things. I offered to make Rowan a partner in the ranch to share everything, but he refused, said he would not take my leavings. He shook his head. Maybe you can succeed where I failed. Maybe he will listen to you. Adaline felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you doing this? Randall's smile was sad. Because I may be angry and hurt, but I am not cruel. And because, God help me, I still hope that someday my brother and I can repair what was broken between us. If you can be the bridge that allows that, then perhaps losing you is not entirely without purpose. She did cry then, overwhelmed by his generosity. Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet. Wait until you have spent a winter trying to live with Rowan's stubborn pride. You may come running back, begging me to reconsider. He stood. Go, find him before I change my mind. I will have Mrs. Chen pack you some supplies. And Adaline, she paused at the door. Yes, be happy. If you cannot be happy with me, at least be happy with him. Otherwise, all of this was for nothing. Adaline found Rowan at the line shack, mucking out the small attached stable. He looked up when he heard hoofbeats, and when he saw her dismounting from the horse Randall had lent her, his expression shifted through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: surprise, hope, fear, resignation. You should not be here, he said, setting aside his pitchfork. It is not proper for you to visit me without a chaperone. If Randall finds out, Randall knows. I told him everything. Rowan went very still. You did what? I told him I could not marry him because I am in love with you. The color drained from Rowan's face. Adaline, no. No, no, no. What have you done? You have ruined everything. Your reputation, your future, my relationship with my brother. I have saved us, she interrupted. Saved us from a lifetime of misery and regret. Saved your brother from a marriage that would have been a lie. Rowan, I could not do it. I could not stand in that beautiful house and pretend to be happy while knowing you were out here alone. So instead you threw away security and stability for what? For me. For a man who has nothing to offer you. His voice rose with each word, anguish and anger mixing together. I told you I cannot support a wife. I told you it would be a mistake. And I am telling you that I do not care, Adaline shouted back. I would rather live in this shack with you than in a mansion with someone else. I would rather struggle and worry and face an uncertain future by your side than spend one more day pretending I do not love you. Rowan stared at her, his chest heaving. You cannot mean that. I have never meant anything more in my life. Adaline, he whispered, and her name sounded like a prayer and a curse. What will we do? Where will we go? Randall made a suggestion about that, actually. She took a deep breath. There is a section of the ranch, 500 acres, that he wants to deed to you. Land that should have been yours from the beginning. He wants you to have it to build something real, but he knows you will not accept it from him. So I am asking you, begging you to put aside your pride and take what is being offered, not for your sake, but for mine. For us. He is trying to buy you for me, Rowan said flatly. He is trying to give his brother what should have been his birthright. There is a difference. Rowan, I know you are proud. I know you have been hurt and you want to prove you do not need anyone. But sometimes accepting help is not weakness. Sometimes it is wisdom. Rowan turned away from her, his hands clenched into fists. She could see the war raging inside him, pride battling with love, stubbornness fighting with practicality. Finally, he said, 500 acres. Yes, near the river, Randall said, good land. I know the section he means. We used to play there as boys before Father died and everything changed. Then take it, please, build us a home, build us a life. Rowan turned back to her and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I cannot believe you did this, cannot believe you chose me. There was no choice to make. My heart decided the moment I met you. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. This time, when he kissed her, it was not desperate or stolen. It was a promise, a commitment, the first moment of the rest of their lives. When they finally broke apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Adaline Turner. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the choice you made. You already are, she whispered. You already are. They rode back to the main house together, and the conversation with Randall was awkward but necessary. The two brothers faced each other in Randall's study, years of hurt and resentment hanging between them. I am sorry, Rowan said finally, the words clearly difficult. I never meant to come between you and Adaline. It just happened and I tried to stop it, but I know, Randall interrupted. She told me, and I believe her. For what it is worth, I think she is right. You two belong together in a way she and I never would have. Rowan swallowed hard. The land. You do not have to do that. I know I do not have to. I want to. It should have been yours years ago, and I should have fought Father over it, but I was young and scared, and I let him bully me into accepting his decision. Let me make it right now, Rowan. Let me be the brother I should have been. Tears ran down Rowan's face, unchecked. I have been so angry at you for so long. I know. I have been angry at you too, for staying and reminding me every day of how unfair it all was. But we are both idiots for letting Father's mistakes poison our relationship. Randall extended his hand. Can we start over? Rowan gripped his brother's hand, then pulled him into a rough embrace. Thank you for everything. Adaline watched from the doorway, her own tears flowing freely. Healing had begun, and it was more than she had dared to hope for. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, not in a church but outside on the land Randall had deeded to Rowan. It was a small ceremony, just a few ranch hands, Mrs. Chen, the minister from Platteville, and Randall, who stood beside his brother as best man. Adaline wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Randall had purchased for her in town, his unexpected gift to the couple. As she spoke her vows, looking into Rowan's blue eyes, Adaline felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was right. This was home. Not a building or a place, but this man who looked at her as if she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. They spent that first night in the line shack, which would be their home until they could build something permanent on their land. Adaline did not mind. In Rowan's arms, with the fire crackling and snow beginning to fall again outside, she felt richer than any mansion could have made her. "Are you sure about this?" Rowan asked in the darkness, holding her close. "It is not too late to change your mind. You could still have the easier life." "I have the life I want," Adaline said firmly. "I have you. You have me," he
This story
agreed,
was
kissing
posted
her
on the
temple.
channel The Rusty
Forever.
Saddle. Please do not
Spring
repost it
came,
in
and
any
with it,
form.
the work of building their future began. Rowan and Adaline worked side by side, planning their house, clearing land, preparing for their first cattle purchase. Randall helped more than Rowan's pride wanted to accept, but less than he wanted to give, striking a careful balance that allowed the brothers to rebuild their relationship. By summer, the foundation of their house was laid. It would not be as grand as Randall's, but it would be theirs, built with their own hands and their own vision. Adaline planted a garden, using seeds Mrs. Chen gave her. Rowan spent long days working his cattle, coming home exhausted but happy, kissing his wife and telling her about his small victories. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch of their nearly finished house watching the sun set over the mountains, Adaline said, "I have something to tell you." Rowan looked at her, concern flickering across his face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Everything is very, very right." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by pure joy. A baby, our baby, due in early spring." Rowan let out a whoop of excitement and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, his eyes were bright. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents." "Yes, are you happy?" "Happy." He cupped her face in his hands. "Adaline, I did not think it was possible to be happier than I already was, but you keep proving me wrong. I love you. I love our life. I love this baby I have not even met yet." "How did I get so lucky?" "A blizzard," Adaline said, grinning. "You got lucky because of a blizzard." He laughed and pulled her close. "Best storm of my life." Their son was born in March of 1885, during a cold snap that reminded them both of that first storm. Adaline labored through the night with Mrs. Chen and the doctor from Platteville in attendance, and Rowan wearing a path in the floor with his pacing. When the baby's cry finally rang out, Rowan burst into the room despite Mrs. Chen's protests. "A boy," Adaline said tiredly, holding the tiny, squalling bundle. "We have a son." Rowan knelt beside the bed, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." They named him Thomas, after Adaline's father who had died when she was young. Randall was named Godfather, and when he held his nephew for the first time, there was such tenderness in his expression that Adaline knew the brothers' relationship had truly healed. Life settled into a rhythm. The ranch prospered. Rowan proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, producing animals that commanded top prices. Adaline managed their household and garden, sold her sewing work in town, and raised Thomas with patient love. 2 years after Thomas, a daughter arrived, Emma, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair. Randall eventually married as well, a widow from Denver named Sarah who had 2 young children of her own. The two families grew close, their children playing together, the adults sharing Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. The bitterness of the past faded, replaced by something stronger and more enduring. One winter evening, nearly 10 years after that first blizzard, Adaline and Rowan sat by their fire while their children slept upstairs. Outside, snow was falling again, big flakes drifting down in the lamplight. "Another storm," Rowan observed, pulling Adaline closer. "Does it remind you?" She asked. "Every storm reminds me of the day my life changed. The day I opened the door and saw you standing there, half frozen and completely beautiful, and knew in that instant that nothing would ever be the same." "You did not know in that instant," Adaline teased. "You were quite determined to send me off to marry your brother. I was a fool. You were noble and stubborn and completely impossible. And you loved me anyway. I did, I do." She turned to kiss him, this man who had become the center of her world. "Do you remember what you said that first day, when we could not leave because of the storm?" Rowan smiled, the slow, rare smile that still made her heart skip. "I said, now you cannot run away." "I could never have run away," Adaline said softly. "Not from you, not from this life we built." "You are my home, Rowan Irving, you always have been." "And you are mine," he replied. "My home, my heart, my everything." Outside, the snow fell faster, blanketing the land in white, but inside they were warm and safe and completely happy. The storm that had once seemed like a disaster had brought them together, and every storm since was just a reminder of that gift. Years continued to pass in a cascade of seasons and small moments. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved working with his father, learning the land and the animals with the same patience Rowan showed. Emma was bright and spirited, with a talent for drawing that Adaline encouraged by ordering pencils and paper from Denver. A third child arrived, another boy they named James, who seemed to be a perfect blend of his older siblings, thoughtful like Thomas, creative like Emma. The ranch expanded as Rowan's reputation for quality cattle spread. He hired hands to help with the work, good men who respected him and stayed year after year. Adaline's sewing business grew as well. She became known throughout the county for her beautiful work, and women came from as far as Colorado Springs to commission dresses and quilts. Randall's family grew too. Sarah had a daughter, giving Randall his first biological child at the age of 42. The delight on his face when he held baby Margaret was something Adaline would never forget. The two families remained close, their children growing up more like siblings than cousins. But the best moments, Adaline often thought, were the quiet ones. Evening walks with Rowan after the children were in bed, their hands clasped as they surveyed their land. Mornings in the kitchen before dawn, drinking coffee together in comfortable silence while the world outside slowly brightened. Nights in their bed, still reaching for each other after all these years, still finding comfort and passion in each other's arms. One autumn afternoon, when Thomas was 16 and already talking about attending agricultural college in Fort Collins, Adaline found an old letter in the bottom of a trunk. It was one of Randall's first letters to her, describing his ranch and his need for a wife. She read it with a strange sense of distance, as if it was someone else's story entirely. "What are you reading?" Rowan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She showed him the letter. "Do you ever think about how differently things could have gone? If the storm had not happened, if we had made it to Platteville on time, I would have married Randall, and you and I might never have had more than a few awkward conversations at family gatherings." Rowan took the letter and read it, then set it aside. "I used to think about that all the time, especially in those first few months after we married. I would wake up in a cold sweat, terrified that I would open my eyes and find it had all been a dream, that you were actually married to Randall and I was alone in that lined shack. And now I know that some things are meant to be. That storm was not an accident or bad luck. It was fate, pushing us together because we were too stubborn to admit what we wanted. He turned her to face him. I was so angry at Father, at Randall, at the world for what I had lost that I had convinced myself I did not deserve happiness. Then you walked through that door and reminded me that life is not about what we have lost, but what we choose to build.
This story was
Adaline
posted on the
kissed him
channel The
gently.
Rusty Saddle. Please do
We
not
have built
repost it
something
in any
beautiful,
form.
have we not? We have built everything, Rowan agreed. And we are not done yet. He was right. There were still years ahead of them, still children to raise and grandchildren to spoil and storms to weather. Thomas did go to agricultural college and came back with new ideas for improving their breeding program. Emma married a teacher from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often with her husband and, eventually, her children. James surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to be a veterinarian, and Rowan paid for his schooling with pride. Randall grew older gracefully, finally easing back from the day-to-day running of his ranch and letting his stepson take over most of the work. He and Rowan spent long afternoons together, riding their land and remembering their childhood, finally able to talk about their father without anger or pain. On Adaline and Rowan's 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling their house and spilling out into the yard. There was music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. As the sun began to set, Rowan took Adaline's hand and led her away from the crowd, up to the small hill behind their house, where they had first laid out the foundation all those years ago. From this vantage point, they could see everything they had built: the house, the barns, the corrals, the fields green with summer growth. In the distance, Randall's property stretched out, equally prosperous. 25 years, Rowan said wonderingly. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean. I can still remember exactly how I felt that first night in the storm, watching you by the fire and thinking I had never seen anyone so beautiful. Beautiful, Rowan laughed. I was dirty and rough and probably smelled like horses. You were beautiful to me. You still are. He pulled her close, and they swayed together to the faint music drifting up from the party below. Do you have any regrets? He asked. About the life you gave up in Boston, about the security you could have had with Randall. Adaline pulled back to look at him seriously. Rowan Irving, in 25 years of marriage, have you ever heard me express a single regret? No. Then, why would I start now? You gave me everything I ever wanted: love, family, purpose, a home. Boston was never home. That fancy house with Randall would never have been home. Home is wherever you are. I love you, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I will love you until the day I die and every day beyond that. I love you too, always. They stood there as darkness fell, two people who had found each other by accident and built a life by choice. Below them, their children and grandchildren laughed and danced. Around them, the land they had worked and loved stretched out in all directions. Above them, stars began to appear in the deepening blue sky. Do you remember what you told me that first night? Adaline asked. When I was worried about propriety and reputation, I told you survival was all that mattered. You told me that staying alive was more important than propriety. And you were right, but not in the way you meant. Staying alive, really alive, means taking risks, means choosing love over security, means building something real instead of settling for something safe. Rowan smiled. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. A cowboy who smiled at me during a blizzard and told me I could not run away. And did you want to run away? Adaline laughed. Never. Not for a single moment. They walked back down to the party hand in hand, and as they rejoined their family, Adaline felt such overwhelming gratitude that it brought tears to her eyes. She had come to Colorado expecting duty and respectability. Instead, she had found passion and partnership, and a love so deep it had reshaped her entire world. The years continued their inevitable march. There were hard times, droughts that tested the ranch, illnesses that frightened them, losses that made them weep. But they faced everything together, their love the foundation that held when everything else shook. Emma gave them 4 grandchildren. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from Wyoming and added 3 more. James surprised them all by marrying late, at 35, to a fellow veterinarian, and together they adopted 2 children who needed a home. Adaline and Rowan's house was always full of noise and laughter, children and grandchildren coming and going. Randall passed away peacefully in his sleep at 73. Rowan grieved deeply but without regrets. Their relationship had been fully healed years earlier, all wounds mended, all forgiveness given and received. At the funeral, Rowan spoke about his brother with love and respect, and when he mentioned how Randall had given him the land that became their home, his voice broke. Adaline stood beside him, her hand in his, lending her strength. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. Rowan's hands became gnarled from decades of hard work, but they were still gentle when they touched Adaline's face. Her eyes grew weaker, but they still lit up every time Rowan entered a room. On a cold December morning, almost 50 years after that first blizzard, Adaline woke in their bed to find snow falling outside the window. Rowan was already awake, sitting in a chair by the window, watching the storm with a small smile on his face. "Another blizzard," she said, her voice hoarse with age. He turned to her and his smile widened. "The storms always make me think of you. I was just thinking the same thing." She patted the bed beside her. "Come here, husband. Keep me warm." Rowan climbed back into bed, pulling her close as he had done thousands of times over 5 decades. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell thick and fast, transforming the world into a white wonderland. "Do you think we will get snowed in?" Adaline asked. "Probably. Thomas will come check on us eventually, but we might be stuck here for a day or 2. "Oh no," Adaline said with mock concern. "Whatever will we do trapped together in this house?" Rowan laughed, the sound still rich and warm despite his years. "I am sure we will think of something. We have had plenty of practice being stranded together." "That we have." They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the storm. Adaline thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach into a blizzard, certain she was heading to her death. She could never have imagined this life, this love, this abundance of joy. "Rowan," she said softly. "Yes, my love, thank you." "For what?" "For opening the door that day, for taking us in, for being too stubborn to let me make the wrong choice, for loving me so well for so long, for all of it." Rowan kissed her forehead tenderly. "I should be thanking you. You chose me when you could have had so much more. You built this life with me when I had nothing to offer but hard work and hope." "You had everything to offer," Adaline corrected. "You just could not see it yet." They stayed in bed most of the morning, talking and dozing and simply being together. Thomas did eventually come, just as Rowan had predicted, riding through the storm to check on his parents. He found them in the kitchen, Adaline making stew while Rowan sat at the table peeling potatoes, the two of them working in the synchronized harmony of 50 years of partnership. "You two doing all right?" Thomas asked, stamping snow off his boots. "We are perfect," Adaline said, smiling at her son. "The storm is beautiful." Thomas shook his head with affectionate exasperation. "You two are the only people I know who get excited about blizzards." "Blizzards brought us together," Rowan said simply. "How could we not love them?" Thomas stayed for lunch, then headed back to his own place before the storm worsened. After he left, Adaline and Rowan returned to their familiar routines. She worked on a quilt she was making for Emma's youngest daughter. He read from a book of poetry James had sent them. As evening fell, they sat by the fire, Adaline's head on Rowan's shoulder. "I have had a good life," Adaline said suddenly. Rowan tensed slightly.
This story was
"Do not
posted on the
talk like
channel
that.
The
You
Rusty
have
Saddle.
plenty of years
Please do not
left."
repost it
"I
in any
know.
form.
I just wanted to say it. Wanted you to know that I have no regrets, no wishes that things had gone differently. This life with you has been everything I ever wanted and so much more than I dared to dream." "The feeling is mutual," Rowan said gruffly. "You made me believe in happiness again, Adaline. You made me believe I deserved good things. Every single day with you has been a gift." They sat there as darkness fell and the storm raged outside. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. They had been young and frightened once, unsure of the future. Now they were old and certain, secure in the knowledge that whatever time remained, they would face it together. The snow fell all night and into the next day, piling up in drifts that reached the windows. Adaline and Rowan were indeed stranded, cut off from the outside world in their cozy house. They did not mind one bit. "You know," Adaline said on the second morning, watching the endless white through the window, "this is very similar to that first storm. Trapped together, nowhere to go, just the two of us. Except this time you cannot run away even if you wanted to," Rowan said with a grin. Adaline laughed, recognizing the echo of his words from 50 years earlier. "I never wanted to run away, not even then, though I pretended otherwise. I know, I could see it in your eyes." "What did you see?" "Recognition. Like you knew me already, even though we had just met. Like your soul said hello to mine and I just had not realized it yet." "That is exactly what it felt like," Adaline said wonderingly. "How did you know?" "Because I felt it too. The moment you walked through that door, something in me said her, just that one word, clear as a bell. Her." Adaline moved into his arms and they held each other as the storm continued its fury outside. They had weathered so many storms together, literal and metaphorical, and come through stronger each time. Eventually, the blizzard passed, as all storms do. The sun came out, transforming the snow into a glittering landscape of diamonds. Their children and grandchildren came to visit, making sure they were all right, bringing fresh bread and gossip and laughter. Life continued in its beautiful, ordinary way. Seasons changed. Grandchildren grew and brought great-grandchildren to meet the elderly couple who had built this family from nothing but love and determination. Adaline and Rowan aged but never apart, always together, always reaching for each other in the night. When Rowan finally passed away at 86, it was peacefully in the spring with Adaline holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for choosing me." Adaline kissed him and whispered, "Thank you for making me want to choose." She lived another 3 years without him, surrounded by family but always missing her other half. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the cowboy who had saved her from a blizzard and captured her heart. She quilted and gardened and watched the ranch she and Rowan had built continue to thrive under Thomas's care. On a December morning, almost exactly 60 years after that first storm, Adaline passed away in her sleep. Her family found her with a smile on her face and an old, yellowed letter clutched in her hand. One of the first letters Rowan had written to her during their courtship, declaring his love and his intention to spend his life making her happy. They buried her next to Rowan on the hill behind the house, where they had stood on their 25th anniversary and looked out over everything they had built. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about his parents' love story, about how a blizzard had brought two souls together and created a legacy that would endure for generations. "They taught us that love is a choice," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled family. "Not just once, but every day. They chose each other over and over again for more than 50 years. They chose to build something real instead of settling for something easy. They chose happiness over security, passion over propriety, and they never regretted it for a single moment." As he spoke, snow began to fall, gentle flakes drifting down from a gray sky, coating the mourners in white. Emma laughed through her tears. "Of course it is snowing. They probably arranged it." "They loved storms," James said, smiling despite his grief. Every blizzard was a celebration for them, a reminder of how they found each other. The family stood together as the snow fell, united in their grief but also in their gratitude. Adaline and Rowan had given them so much more than just life. They had given them an example of what love could be when it was true and deep and unwavering. Years later, when Thomas's grandson asked him about his grandparents, Thomas took him up to the hill where two simple headstones stood side by side. The inscriptions were simple: Rowan Irving, beloved husband and father, and Adaline Irving, beloved wife and mother. But beneath those words, someone had carved a single line: brought together by a blizzard, united forever by love. "Tell me the story again," the boy asked, as children had been asking for generations. Thomas smiled and began the familiar tale. It all started with a storm, the biggest blizzard Colorado had seen in years. A stagecoach got caught in it, and inside was a woman who had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met. But fate had other plans. The story lived on, passed down from generation to generation, growing slightly in the telling but never losing its essential truth. Adaline and Rowan's love became a foundation, a touchstone, a reminder to their descendants that the best things in life are often found when we are brave enough to choose love over convenience, passion over security, and truth over expectation. The ranch continued to thrive, staying in the family for over 100 years. Each generation added their own chapters to the story, but they all looked back to that cold December day in 1883, when a blizzard stranded a mail-order bride in a lined shack with a cowboy who smiled and said, "Now you cannot run away." She never had run away. She had stayed and built and loved, and in doing so, created something that lasted far beyond her own lifetime. The blizzard that could have killed her instead gave her life in every way that mattered. And in Colorado, every December when the snow begins to fall and the wind starts to howl, some people swear you can still feel it, the echo of that first storm and the love it brought into the world.